Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. In the last parts, we did some minor side stuff around the world before heading over here to the Forest Temple, the first major dungeon in the game. And they throw two Wolfos at us all at once, just to show that the adult temples aren't really messing around the same way that the kid temples were. Though we have our first gold sculpture right there, and I'm going to tell you right now, unlike the child dungeons, which had a bit of a variant amount of sculptures, if I recall, or actually, wait, do they all have 4? Either way, all the adult temples have 5 sculptures, so make sure you find all 5 before you leave, because you, more often than not, don't want to backtrack through these areas. Now, the biggest mechanical difference in the adult dungeons, beyond the items you have, comes in the form of what we're going to see in this next small chest. It's technically a Zelda staple, but it's the first time we're seeing one in this game. We found a small key. This key will open up a locked door. You can use it only in this dungeon. Moving forward, not all doors are going to be that are locked are going to be opened by killing every enemy in the room or hitting a certain switch. There are just going to be outright small key locked doors that you need to find a corresponding small key to open. You can use small keys in a dungeon on any door you want, though there is a finite amount of them, though I don't think you can ever get stuck. Additionally, every single dungeon moving forward is going to have a bit of a main mechanic to deal with. In this case, we need to find those 4 Poes right there, as the elevator that they took the flames from, causing it to slink down, the boss is just down that way. These dungeons are closer to labyrinths more often than not, because you can usually find the boss door relatively early in them. I say usually, as only 3 of them have that technically. But still, that's more often than not, as there's 5 temples. And here we got new enemies. These are Stalfos. These are something you should get used to seeing because you fight them relatively often as Adult Link. They like to block with their shields a lot. They're sort of a follow-up to the Lizalfos, at least in terms of the game's main loop. They guard a lot, and they'll try to jump attack you. My best advice for them, once again, though, is to use the spin attack, as the energy wave generated by it can more often than not at least pierce their guards. Not as often as it can the Wolfoses, but at least it gives you a relatively safe option of attack. And on the topic of there being 5 temples, there was originally going to be 6. There was, in development, going to be a dungeon for us to get the light medallion from Rauru, where essentially you would be in the Temple of Light he mentioned, restoring the power to the sacred, to the spiritual stones, so that you could open the door of time from within the sacred realm. But that dungeon got cut for either space or time, and frankly speaking, I don't think the game needs it, because honestly, with the amount of dungeons we have, this game's a relatively safe length. 1 extra dungeon would have just felt like a bit of bloating to me. Not much of that dungeon, I believe, is left in the game's code, barring maybe the occasional text element, cutscene element, or texture from what I'm aware. Like, there's particularly cutscenes where they show the spiritual stone and then the place where that stone gets its power, like the Lost Woods, Death Mountain, or like Hylia, in the case for the spiritual stone of water. Now, despite this being, in many ways, a big step forward for the game in terms of dungeon design, as we actually have to actively think about what directions we might need to go for key usage, I overall find the Forest Temple to be honestly a bit easier than Jabu-Jabu's Belly, as it's more mazy, yes, but barring maybe 1 or 2 elements, there's not really anything too puzzle-heavy here. I'd say the first actual puzzle in this game doesn't really come into play until maybe even 2 dungeons from now. As the early dungeons still are relatively easy. Big chests still signify something important though. The map, the dungeon item, the compass, or in each case in a dungeon moving forward, an extra super decorated chest that we need to find to access the boss fight. And as for the map for the Forest Temple, we're looking at 4 floors, but some of them are relatively small. Now, despite the more maze-like attitude, there is still usually hints of which way is usually progress. For instance, here in the Forest Temple, if you look over the doors and there's an emblem, that implies which way you're supposed to go next. Or at least which way is technically forward from the way that the dungeon intends you to progress. Because I think there are technically ways, if you super break the game, to go in things in these dungeons generally out of order. But I don't care to do them, nor am I aware of them. Though we do have one of the most annoying gold skulltulas to get in the game right here, as well as chests in a dungeon. We need to hookshot up to this chest. However, if you get the angle even slightly wrong, you fall in the water and have to try again. The best I can say for that is just keep trying and you'll eventually get it. Alternatively, you could wait until you've cleared what is technically Dungeon 6. And get the dungeon item there, just so you can reach that skulltula without having to actually hookshot up to there. Also, I know I brought it up a little bit earlier. I know people rave about this game's soundtrack on the whole, usually, like Hyrule Field theme, and the battle themes, and the town themes, and all that. Especially some of the battle themes. Not really feeling the dungeon themes in this game. Particularly for the adult temples. There's like maybe 1 or 2 songs I technically like. And even then, depending on the version you're playing, one of those songs, for atmosphere's sake, isn't even in future versions of the game due to them taking it out and replacing it with sort of a remix of a different dungeons theme. More on that when we get to that in like part 19, 20, whenever the hell we get there. I just feel in general that Ocarina of Time goes for more of the atmospheric approach for its dungeon themes, and that's not a bad idea, honestly. It really does make these places feel very unique from the previous dungeons, particularly this place's almost haunted atmosphere is really cool. I would just prefer if they had more of a melody to them on top of that. Because I know you can do atmospheric with a good melody. Just look at the Metroid Prime 1 soundtrack and Prime 3 soundtrack, and I guess the Prime 2 soundtrack, but I don't like to admit anything in that game is good. Aside from maybe the Lower Brinstar mix. That, by the way, is a bubble. In later games, they can curse you, causing you to be unable to draw your sword, but I don't think that's actively an effect they can inflict on you in this game. You can take them out just by hookshotting them in the brain twice. There are arrows painted on the floor. Thank you for pointing out the guides and which ways to pull this particular block, Navi. I would never have figured that out. Anyway, going back to the music. Because I know Zelda games have done that even. Minish Cap's got great music tracks for its dungeons that also have good atmosphere. The Oracle games got that both in stride. Some of the Link's Awakening ones have that. They can do it. I just feel like they leaned a bit too much into the atmospheric here. That said, even though I prefer Majora's Mask's themes for its dungeons, they have a similar problem. I think the only melody I can easily dig out and hum out of any of the Majora's Mask dungeon themes are Stone Tower Temple and, technically speaking, Ikana Castle. As Swamp Temple, it's a nice tune, but nothing too catchy. Snowhead's okay, I guess. Great Bay Temple, I like that area, but it's mostly mechanical noise if I recall correctly. I think the first 3D Zelda to really hit the nail on good soundtrack for its dungeon may have been Twilight Princess or Skyward Sword, but I honestly can't remember most of that because I have not played either game in several years. Actually, I might make Twilight Princess my summer game since I haven't done one this summer yet. Yeah, I'm gonna give me an excuse to finally finish Twilight Princess HD, too. Yeah, you know what? I'm doing that. I mean, it's either that or play through Skyward Sword for the 3rd time in my life, and be as split on that game as I usually am. Game's good. Controls are a bit wonky sometimes, and I feel like they made every enemy a bit too intense. Got great graphics, good music, good story, some good puzzles. It's just that it's okay at best. Some of the stuff you do between really good dungeons is just kind of lame. Now, this next area right here is very important. I'll actually be, I want to say, cutting back here at least once later on in the dungeon, as this is a rather key area to progressing this dungeon. Also, with that said, with the advent of the adult Link dungeons, whoa, this place is a little trippy. This corridor is all twisted. You don't say, Navi. With the advent of the adult Link dungeons, most dungeons are now going to take at least 2 parts just because they are that much longer, usually. Watch for the shadows of monsters that hang from the ceiling. If you stay in rooms where Navi says that for too long, a wallmaster comes down and grabs you, and I believe drags you back to the beginning of the dungeon, but honestly, I can't recall, as I have not gotten trapped by one of them in this game in years. I know in, I think, Wind Waker, they take you back to a specific place. In the 2D games, it's always the start of the dungeon, but I forget how they work here. And here we gotta fight more Stalfoses. With that said, do not fall in that hole in the center of the room. Why? It is an actual hole, it's not just a graphical thing for style. And if you fall back down there, you're back in the room where we first fought Stalfos earlier in the video, and that is a lot of backtracking you need to do to get back here. And, that's no good. With that said, we're not done with this room just from that, because we have 2 more Stalfoses to beat. And these ones have a particular sub-gimmick. We need to take them both out around the same time. It doesn't have to be all at once, but if you kill one and then hesitate too long in killing the second one revives from its very frame rate stuttering causing corpse. I'll be real, this is both strict and not strict depending on how aggressive the enemy AI is feeling. I have had cases where the Stalfos is super aggressive and I take it out super quickly, and then I have cases like this where it's just not wanting to attack me and therefore I can't beat it in time. And just to save you some time, I'm going to fast forward to the point where I actually get them both taken out at once. Just because you don't want to sit through me killing 2 Stalfos over and over again. And this is a particularly interesting big chest, as this is the dungeon item. And one of the most useful items in the game, up there with the hookshot, we got the fairy bow. On the select item subscreen, you can set it to the C buttons. Press C to take it out and hold it. As you hold down C, you can aim with the analog stick. Release C to let fly with an arrow. It's the adult version of the slingshot, and it gets much more lethal because of that. I want to say, whereas the slingshot bolts do 1 damage, arrows do 2? That's generally actually how Adult Link works. Like the Master Sword, for instance, does 2 damage. Also, I moved to the opposite side of the room there because you want to come back in, or leave that room the way you came in really quick. As you may have noticed, in this room, there are Poes on the paintings. These are the ones that took the fire from the central room. We need to shoot the painting that they go into, and slowly reduce their ways to escape from us until we destroy all 3 paintings. We need to do this in this room, and the room opposite this one from the from the fairy bow. Once you do that, you get to fight a Poe mini-boss. They take either 5 arrows or like 3 jump slashes. They have a twirling attack, they can turn invincible, they can twirl while invisible, and that's about it. They're pretty bland mini-bosses. They do all have names, though. This is Joel. I don't know why they're named, but they are. And I think, technically speaking, in Oracle of Seasons, the Poes in the second to last dungeon, that's not like Onox's lair, is named after 2 of these. Now, here's the thing. There is technically a... there's a way to speed up fighting these things. Where... if you use a Deku Nut while they're invisible, you can stun them still, but it's a very short stun period. As in, probably not worth doing. You're probably just better off not using it. And for taking out one of them, you get not only some arrows dropped from them, you also get a chest containing a small key. Also, fun fact, their laughter, every Poe's laughter in Ocarina of Time, I believe, is just a intensely sped up version of Ganondorf's laugh from earlier in the game. An odd thing that this game shares with Mario 64, but not the only thing this game shares with Mario 64. As in that game, I think the Boo laughs and one of the other laughs were just sped up Bowser laughs, I believe. Or slowed down, should the case be. The reason I say it's not the only thing shared between the two games, as this game runs on a modified version of the Mario 64 engine. That's why there's just so much oddly similar between the two, and I want to say they share similar sound fonts. Also, I'm speeding up every future fight against these two, against these four, I guess, just because it's the same stuff over and over again. Only the fourth one is actually something unique. That, by the way, was Beth, I think. This one is not a small key, though. This one gives us the dungeon's compass. And I'm going to say it again in about 5 minutes when the part ends. But keep in mind this room for later, as this is where I'm going to start the next part. Also, speaking of next parts, something I forgot to mention last part was, if you're going for every Skulltula as early as you can technically have one more than I do now. If you go up towards where Hyrule Castle was in the future, there is a Skulltula you can grab as soon as you get the hook shot. With that said, just because of narrative stuff, I'm saving that to be my last Skulltula. So if you're going for everything as soon as you can, just add 1 to your Skulltula total, as you can get that one as soon as you get the Skulltula. It's on the back of a gate that you can go behind. Now that we have the fairy bow, though, we want to backtrack to right before the twisted corridor. As you may have noticed, there was an eye switch above this door. And it's the silver eye switch, we can hit it multiple times. As soon as I take care of the bubble. Oh, wait, no, before I do that, actually, there is another thing we can do in this room. You might notice there's a chest on the map. We need to go to around here, and if we go around this next corner, in this direction, I forget where I'm going here. It's always easy to get lost in this particular room to me. There is a gold eye switch up here that will drop a chest containing some arrows. Again, one of my goals with this LP is to at least get every chest in a dungeon. And I believe I do throughout the LP. If I miss one, that's that's embarrassing. Alright, now we go back here as we want to shoot the eye switch. The bow's accuracy is about the same as the slingshot. The point where you're aiming is just above where the blue section is on the bow. Though I believe they've readjusted the camera angle so that you can tell exactly where you're aiming in the 3DS version. Shooting that eye switch untwists the corridor, and that allows us to access the chest you may have seen if you looked around on that previous room. Or in this room when the corridor was twisted, rather. And now I'm going to let that shadow fall down. This is a wall master. They die to either a couple arrows or a couple of sword strikes. Nothing too threatening, though. They give good money. In this particular chest that we're going to see in every dungeon moving forward is another key item for that dungeon, and I mean that literally, the boss key. You can now get inside the chamber where the boss is. If you don't get the boss key, you're not beating the dungeon, so make sure you grab that. Most of the time it's along the general path of the dungeon, but there are a couple times you need to take a bit of a split path to get it. Hey, get back here. There we go. Honestly, though, in terms of the first real dungeon in Ocarina of Time, because the Young Link dungeons are more so tutorials for how dungeon flows are usually going to go, the Forest Temple isn't too bad. Yeah, for kids it might be a bit harder, as there's a lot more pathways to keep in mind, and the addition of keys alone really ups the complexity of these things. But if you can get this far, you're probably used enough to exploring that on a first playthrough, you can get through this place eventually. It'll be a longer process than any of the Young Link dungeons, but it's very doable. Compared to, say, Majora's Mask, which, even though it's my favorite Zelda game, even I have to admit, the difficulty curve on its dungeons is not exactly kind, as it's kind of like a second quest of sorts for Ocarina of Time. In fact, in development, that's exactly what it was. This is a floor master. It's a wall master that just tries to hurt you. It'll charge into you a couple times and it's invincible while doing so, and when you kill it, it splits into 3 baby ones that, if left alone long enough, will grow into full-size ones, or at least one of them will. I think the other 2 might dissipate if you don't kill them in time. Nothing too stressful, though later on some of the replacements can get annoying. And now our goal is to go back to the twisted pathway. However, there's thankfully a shortcut, as this door right here leads us right back to the room where that was. So just to save some time, I'm going to cut back to the top of this room. And we want to shoot the eye again, as we want to get back to the room where the compass was. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 17, we're going to be continuing through the rest of the Forest Temple, completing it in the process. See you guys then.